Rashad, what's the worst part about being a podcast host?
That's a good question. I haven't thought of that before. I would say the worst part for me is there's a general guide that people say is you should niche down and
Yeah.
focus on one thing. And my personality is I want to get into everything. I want to talk about entrepreneurship, innovation, but I also want to talk about religion. I want to talk about identity. So for me, I would say the worst, maybe the hardest thing, and this is maybe kind of sidestepping the question you're asking is focusing on a niche, and essentially I don't do that. And perhaps that's why my podcast is not growing as well as it would be if I did do that. If I made these 20-minute segments, 10-minute segments where I talk about just, investing in health.
Yeah, you
And the
totally
hardest
said.
part for me is, I and maybe that's the worst part for me is forcing myself to have some episodes which are just focused. uh, And I do webinars, and that's why partly I do them is because the webinars I can be like, this is a topic for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. You totally did sidestep my question. I meant to I meant to catch you off guard there, but it's okay. Welcome back to How It's Met, the podcast where we chat with people shaping the future of health tech and healthcare. This time around, we're joined by the inimitable Dr. Rishad Usmani, the current founder of HealthTech Investors, mentor with Techstars, and so much more. Rashad, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Jeff, and I'm a big fan of what you're doing as well. And when I was your age, my focus was on simply completing residency, and I was on remediation when I was your age as well during my residency. So the fact that you're doing so much more outside of clinical medicine is amazing, and I commend you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I think sometimes I stretch myself too thin, especially in the past couple days, as I told you, as when I sit in bed all day wondering why I went to that family medicine social and had a bad bout of gastro. And yeah, not a fun experience. Regardless, I'm really happy to have you here today, Rashad. And as you said, your journey has been anything but straightforward. And I mean, I'm not going to tell the whole story for you. I know that you left Ontario for med school. You took a circuitous path through BC for residency, then made it back to Ontario finally in 2020. If you don't mind, if you could tell us a little bit about this journey and how this unconventional start to journey shaped your mindset, that'd be really appreciated.
Sure, I'll try and be as brief as possible.
Sure.
So I don't think I was meant to be a doctor or a physician.
Why?
Um, I think my personality and what I enjoy doing, solo work, creative work, going really deep into problems doesn't fit the medical model of practice currently, especially family medicine. Um, Ideally, I have two patients in a day and really dig deep into all of their physical and mental health issues and try to come with a solution. Um, I see 70 patients a day, so there's a lot of tension there for me in the way clinical medicine is designed in Canada, anyways, and the way ideally I would practice. Uh, so I did my undergrad from University of Toronto in human biology and health and disease. I went to the Caribbean for med school, partly because I didn't know what I wanted to do really, and my background is Indian, so my choices were doctor or doctor growing up, um, and I picked
No
doctor.
engineer?
No, so my dad was an engineer, and I actually wanted to be an engineer. I remember I applied to Waterloo, and it was a big thing because my parents were really and in retrospect, I think it's the right decision. I think being a physician has given me a lot of opportunities, and I enjoy quite a bit of it as well. Um, but engineering was not on the table. So I did my undergrad and in health and disease, went to the Caribbean for med school. I didn't do well in undergrad. I think my GPA was 2.9 something or maybe 3.0. So I wasn't going to get into a Canadian school. I went to St. George's University in Grenada in the Caribbean. You know, I have I have a fairly eidetic memory. Um, I've been a good test taker when I apply myself. So med school was, I somewhat cruised through it, which was a mistake to an extent. I failed one of my exams, step 2 CS. And this is completely on me. I studied for that exam on the bus drive to the test center. For an hour and a half or 2 hours. Anyways, I failed that exam, and that exam was a marker to, can you speak English essentially in the States? I'll pause so you stop laughing at my failures, Jeff. Um,
Why would you
yeah.
study on the bus right there?
I think it was hubris because the exam is supposed to be such an easy exam.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, like I got this. I don't need to study for this. And there were exams in the past where I did the same thing and I did well. So it was hubris, overconfidence, ego. But and I got a swift kick in my butt. After I failed the exam, it was a screening exam essentially. So if you didn't pass, you didn't get any interviews. So I didn't match my first year. I was about 250K in debt, and I was thinking of the paths I can take an MD from a Caribbean med school uh, without matching, and what I could do to repay the debt and just live life. The only realistic path is to match and keep trying because that amount of debt is really hard to repay with research career or other careers. And I did not know about entrepreneurship or investing, innovation at that. I was very focused on residency and matching. I did a year of research in cardiology under a cardiologist affiliated with Columbia. And then he kind of said, if you do this year of research with me, I'll get you a position in internal medicine, one of the hospitals. So that didn't pan out. I got published. I got, I think, 3 publications in good cardiology journals. So it was a good experience, but it was essentially a data entry person. A lot of research, especially in the hospital, as you just look up data entry and you're doing some statistics, but it wasn't exciting. It was a goal to an end. So I was still a Canadian citizen. I remember I was crossing the border back and they denied my visa. They said, you don't have enough ties to the States to be there. And while I was in med school, my parents had moved to the States. So I didn't really have anywhere to be in Canada. And all my
jeez.
stuff was in New York. So after they denied my visa, and what they said is the work you're doing is a research position. So you should be on a work visa, not on a visitor visa, because I wasn't being paid for this.
Yeah,
So I was couch surfing in Ontario. And what I kind of learned at this point is if I want to match, I need clinical experience. So I essentially emailed and called every program coordinator in all the med schools in Canada. And I've talked about this before. I probably sent about 1,000 emails and phone calls over the 4 years before I passed. One of the secretaries or the program coordinators gave me a list of all the clerkship rotations. I don't think they were supposed to do this, but what that gave me is a list of where med students rotate. And so I just called people and I said, I'm a IMG, I'm a Canadian that went to the Caribbean, and I'm just looking for clinical observership. I was very lucky and somewhat persistent, and I had a few people take me on, and I'm very thankful for them. I think they're one of the biggest reasons I did match eventually. And I was in Western for a bit, and then in a few clinics. I did a nephrology rotation at Western, and when I did it, nephrology, and you probably know this, they're one of the bigger departments at Western, and they're very linked with internal medicine. I remember I met with nephrology, Dr. Jevnik, I don't know if he's still there,
I'm not sure.
and he asked me. He was head of nephrology back then, and Dr. Cloud Cortis, I want to say, he was the program director for internal medicine. Dr. Jevnikar asked me, "Do I want to be a nephrologist?" Essentially, it was like, "If you want to be a nephrologist, we'll get your residency here." Um,
That's a loaded
Looking back,
question.
yeah, and I said, "I don't know." That's why I still kind of. This is going back when I did match. I had one interview at University of Washington for internal medicine. It was their satellite program in Boise, Idaho, and they essentially asked me, "Do I want to do a fellowship?" And they didn't have fellowships in their site, and I said, "Yes." to that question. So there's a few mistakes I've made by just not knowing what the other person has asked me, or I probably could have matched realistic chance in internal medicine back in 2012 if I said yes to that question. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I realize this will take another half an hour if I go in detail with everything that's happened. But essentially, I did match. I went back to New York on a student visa for a little bit, but I came back here, couch surfed a lot. My brother matched in psychiatry, moved to Winnipeg. There's this one exam called NAC medical schools in Canada did a study to indicate what is the best predictor of you passing your CCFP for IMGs. And they said if you do well on the NAC you'll pass the CCFP. So the screening criteria for an interview in Canada for family medicine residency at that point was solely a high score in the NAC. I studied, I did really well in it. I think I got 98 percentile. So that landed me a bunch of interviews all over Ontario. I got rejected from UBC. I emailed them, I think I'll be a great fit for you guys. I'd love for a chance at interview. They just sent a generic email back, spelling my name wrong. I'm sure. Saying, thank you. Thank you. I said, thank you, Rashad. I should remember the way to spell my name. Um, but where the interview slots are full. This is like in early December, late November. Early January, they emailed me, there's an interview slot open and we'd love to have interview. Rest of history, I matched there. I was in remediation for a bit. Uh, Past remediation was more about reflection in medicine. Learned a lot in terms of navigation, how to be in this world and in the work or corporate environment from that. Was working as a full-time hospitalist at Surrey Memorial Hospital, great group of people, good program. But, wasn't finding myself fulfilled, was finding, okay, I'm missing something. Launched my first startup, grew it to about seeing 1,100 patients, a total team of 15. Didn't work out largely because the business model wasn't working and also because I was working full time in clinical medicine. So I was working 9 to 5.
You're
And then I
taking
was
this
doing
too far,
this.
Rashad. You're stealing my questions.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I'll be briefer. And then 6 to midnight, I was doing the startup. I closed the startup, started angel investing, and then HealthTech Investors kind of launched because I saw a need for physicians wanting to invest, wanting to be involved, but
Yeah.
not having someone to guide them through the whole investment process. There's tons of angel groups, but usually the diligence is left to the investor.
Hmm.
There's very few groups that I've found that will do the diligence and bring you along the way.
Hmm.
So I thought the pitch competition was the perfect way to launch that, is to show everyone, how do you screen startups, how do you do the diligence, and how do you invest, and what do you do after.
Hmm.
So I'll pause there. I know I put a lot of effort into the initial story and then I kind of sped up there.
Yeah.
So feel free to ask any questions.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you did highlight kind of the ways that your initial like circuitous experience through the medical system shaped your path and how you navigate life itself. But then you did talk a little bit about Clinic Up. Then you do have this like entire 18-minute long video on your YouTube channel that highlights your story about Clinic Up. And it's a fascinating story. But if you could highlight in a little more detail as to why specifically you wanted to work on a startup and why you want to take that departure from just purely clinical career, that'd be really interesting. I would also love to learn about like what tribulations you had and what led to its shutdown as well.
Yeah. It was a completely selfish endeavor. I was not feeling fulfilled in my work. I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted to do something that I thought could be bigger, uh, could make the world better. I think as physicians, we all want to help people. And once we land in clinical medicine, there's so many barriers from an operational, from a societal, from a systems perspective that we feel helpless at times. I did want to help people, but also I just wanted to do something exciting. I wanted to do something. I'm a big fan of David Goggins. I don't know if you know him.
I do.
Yeah. So I think it's life is suffering, and manufactured suffering is better than suffering that's thrust upon you. So manufacture your own suffering, go through it, come to the other side. And that's where peace and happiness come for me. So I did a Vipassana a while ago, which is a 10-day silent meditation I recommend will do that as well. If you're in a stable mental space, it's a lot because you're not speaking 10 days, meditating 14 hours a day. Um, but essentially, I was not happy with clinical work. And I thought, okay, what what systems, processes can I improve? How can I make healthcare better, but also give myself a challenge? I didn't know anything about the business. So I said, okay, there are things we do in medicine that can be automated and should. Things like as a hospice, I had lots of order sets. Why isn't this filled already? Like if I put pneumonia based on the GFR, the patient's history, it should just give me the antibiotic I need to. Like it's a simple algorithm. Medicine is an art. It's very complex. Clinical practice is very complex. But there's a lot of things we do to limit liability, focus on patients' wants, needs, patients' anxieties, maximize billing. But there are things in clinical practice that are very algorithmic.
Mhm.
What's first line for diabetes? When do you stop metformin based with GFR? If I'm getting too technical, just pause because I don't know if your audience is mostly physicians, Jeff, or not. Um,
No, it's all
but
good. I'd love to just hear as to, like, what specifically from this kinda dissatisfaction with medicine led to the founding of Clinic Up.
yeah, so essentially I landed, okay, what are some console types that are completely automated or I can
Mhm,
completely automate, put it into a software and um, release it to the world essentially. And I landed on travel medicine.
mhm.
So I wrote an algorithm to automate travel medicine consults because it doesn't. That was the birth of Clinic Up or initially Skip Clinic, what it was called. I had a falling out with my initial co-founder. And that's why we rebranded to Clinic Up. With COVID, we launched Skip Clinic or Clinic Up before COVID, like a month before, like November, and I think COVID happened in January.
Yikes.
Um, so we had to pivot the model completely, and that's how I kind of pivoted to just general health because no one was traveling, so there was no market for travel medicine consults,
Mhm,
and that's essentially the birth of Clinic Up or Skip Clinic.
mhm. And I mean, it seems like there was plenty of reason to start a travel medicine focused, like algorithmic medicine focused startup, because if you're able to replicate that process without or with as little hands on involvement as possible, you can basically churn through patients, make sure that patients get the care that they need, make sure you bill appropriately, and you have this essentially self perpetuating mechanism to generate, I guess, benefit for everyone. But I guess what specifically led to the peak of where it was? Because from what I remember from that video that you had posted, you also did get an offer for acquisition at one point, didn't you?
Yeah. So what happened is we pivoted to mental health.
Mm,
There's a massive pain point that still exists in Ontario and the Canadian healthcare system of access to psychiatrists.
yeah.
And the reason is there's no streamlined process to get all the psychiatrists in one place and offer them consults and kind of package it nicely for them. So all they have to do is see the patient. So what we did is in Clinic Up, all the physician had to do is see the patient and write their note. They don't have to do billing. They don't have to write consult notes. They don't have to order the lab. They don't have to do anything else essentially. From their note, we write the consult for them. We'll order their labs. We'll order their imaging. We'll do their billing. That model was fairly attractive to clinicians. And that's why we had quite a few physicians sign up and stay with us throughout clinical. Because we had this is one of the hardest things what a lot of telemedicine providers or clinics will tell you is recruiting physicians.
Mhm,
There's enough patients. It's getting the physicians and then matching the demand and supply um, to make sure the business model works out. So because we were growing fast, we had interest. We were getting referrals directly from the nurse hotline in Ontario, telehealth or telehealth in Ontario. They were referring patients to us and getting contract with some pharmacies. Uh, we had a few partnerships, one with Hellway, found a few different organizations that are doing well now. Um, so we had a 6 million acquisition offer verbally, but what happened is as they started digging deeper into our service, it was fairly evident we are a service provider. We didn't have much software to back our IP. The 6 million offer was still on the table, but this is more just um, serendipitous that their executive leadership had a family emergency and got sick, and in that time we got sued for trademark infringement. There was a pediatric urgent care center in Quebec that said we were using the trademark and they were in French. So when their SEO was based on Clinique Up, and when people were looking up Clinique Up, we were coming up, and their name was Up Clinic. Um, so we thought about fighting it a little bit, and we did, and we talked to our lawyers, but didn't see like they would back off. And at that point, our business model, there wasn't much room for profits. I think our margins were low single digits, and I didn't see a path to grow or scale. I think it could be a great lifestyle business, uh, but it couldn't be what I wanted it to be. And it also had gone so far from that automated telemedicine or automated consult path. Um, yeah, and it just had to kind of close it. And I'll pause there. There's a lot more I can talk about, and I think at some point I will.
Mhm.
But there were internal team dynamics and differences in vision and other things,
Yeah.
which I'll talk about in
I mean, like, if you I'll give you space to talk about that right now. We'll frame it as if you had to take away like 3 to 5 points in starting a startup or making sure that you are best set up to succeed when starting a startup, what would you say to future founders?
the team is incredibly important. Who you start the startup with is everything. I think you can talk about the idea, you can talk about the market, you can talk about the problem you're solving, your commercialization strategy, and all this stuff. But um, who you're working with is everything. So pick your co-founder very carefully. And sometimes you don't know anyone to start a startup with. So you're kind of going on founder matching services, or Y Combinator has one. If you do that, have a long cliff. A cliff is essentially when you divide equity within the startup, or say, you get 50%, I get 50%, or whatever you decide to do. Have some have some markers say, okay, you need to be full time beyond this date. When people say I'll be full time once we start doing well, that's not.
It's not specific enough.
Yeah, it's not specific enough. It needs to be time based, not milestone based, because the milestones will shift. And doing well is very vague. Um, so have I would say a 2-year cliff or in a 6-year vesting. Vesting usually it's a 1-year cliff, 4-year vesting, but I don't think that's long enough at the very early stage. Founders do. But ideally, you started with someone you worked with, or you started alone, outsource initially. Once you have traction, which is often the better way for physicians to do it. As you outsource your MVP, and then once you have a little bit of traction, you can bring some, you know, and this is contingent of you don't know anyone who can build your product early on. If you know someone, that's different.
Mhm.
But co-founder conflict is one of the biggest reasons that startups
Mhm.
fall apart. So who you work with is very important,
Mhm.
and how committed they are to the startup, to having just working with you for the next 6 to 10 years. People don't realize you're signing up.
It's basically
You
marriage.
should be, yeah, you should be prepared for 10 years.
Yeah.
So if you're not prepared to work with that person for 10 years, then now I started with them. And you can work on it for a few months and see how committed they are and how committed you are to the ideas.
Yeah. Fair enough. Um, I mean, after you, I guess, exited Clinic Up or closed it down because of the various troubles you had with it, you ended up working to some degree with M Disrupt as well as Enlightened. Uh, I mean, both these groups allow specifically for startups to connect with clinicians or experts in a field to allow for, I guess, vetting of a health specific, I guess, claim that that a startup may have. So, in your perspective or in your words, would you agree or disagree with the value add that I had just voiced, or was there any value add from a physician's perspective that these different groups have as well?
No, I would say it's kind of my quick answer.
Okay.
Um, there's a lot of physicians looking to leave clinical medicine.
Hmm.
Consulting for startups is not a viable path.
Why?
Startups don't have the money, and most of them do not do well. The startups that will succeed, they're invested by VCs or even the ones we invest in. We give them free advice because we put money in them. And, $500 here and there, that's not a viable path.
Fair.
What I would recommend physicians who want to get into investing or into the startup ecosystem, give your advice for free, but limit it to like an hour every other week or an hour a month. Something that's reasonable. Don't give too much advice for free. You can take equity. You can charge for it, especially if you're in a very niche specialty. You're the only one that does, I don't know, interventional mitral valve replacements or something very esoteric, very specific. Then yeah, you can charge for your expertise. But the market there is more established companies, pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, Roche, and, big pharma. They will pay. They will pay hour for your advice. It's not startups. So because A, they don't have money,
Hmm.
and B, the advice they're looking for is somewhat different. Usually, when pharma is or these more established companies, they're looking for advice that is more immediate, actionable. So maybe they have a product already and they're looking for a commercialization, go to market strategy,
Yeah.
or they just want to get your opinion on it. A startup doesn't have a product usually. Um, and depending again, there's a lot of variance here between a software startup versus a medical device versus diagnostic versus biotech. But I think it's a great way to be involved, but it's not. I think it's hard to build a viable business physician perspective. Startups need physicians to be involved. I think that's very important
Hmm.
that we are. Um, but conferences, part of different angel groups, or even just posting on LinkedIn. The way I did it, so I formally advised one startup for equity, and it was the way they found me is through a group called SOAP,
Yeah.
Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So you can join these groups and you can just post your thoughts on LinkedIn. So there, our workflow and the deficiencies in our workflow and our pain points are very obvious to us. Missed appointments, or the fact that I see 70 there, or the fact that these things could be automated, liability billing, but they're not obvious to entrepreneurs. They're not obvious to software engineers or founders. So just saying those things out on platform like LinkedIn or Twitter, I think goes a long.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So, was your path then, if I'm reading this correctly, one of a physician founder to someone who was considering physician consulting, then realizing that the only real way out would be through physician angel investing? Is that how it went?
Not exactly, but close. So what I would say is, when you talk about a way out, you have to define that more.
Mm,
As a physician, we say we make anywhere from on average 300 to 600K a year. And we look for a way out. We often say, okay, I need to make this much before I kind of pivot up, before I leave out of clinical medicine. And that's, to be frankly, not a realistic vision. There will be a dip in salary to quite an extent before you ramp up to that amount again. Or you might never, you might be relying on, if you raise a fund or if you're investing, carry payout 5, 10 years from now. What I really wanted to do is productize myself. So Boring Naval private cats framework, Vigilist is, you know, if you are an N of one, if you're just going to put yourself out there, your thoughts and ideas, and I'll be fired if you work for yourself. So that's why I kind of do the newsletter, the podcast, and HealthTech Investors is, it's essentially me putting my thoughts and ideas out there. And I'm hoping some people resonate with that.
mhm,
Um, I don't have a clear path to a way out yet,
mm,
but I think that a few things I've played with is monetizing a newsletter, like subscription basis or running ads on it, monetizing the community. Most angel groups charge some amount, or building a fund and then having it like 2 and 20, or the 2% management fee, 20% carry model. You know, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Jeff, how you look at what you're doing and monetizing it in the future. I think there's value in community, and there's different ways you can monetize it. But right now, my focus is on building engagement in the community and growing the community. Uh, and once I have demonstrated enough value, enough trust, a big part of why I do that, I invest my own money alongside my community. Then I think I will monetize it, but exactly how, I don't know.
Yeah. And I share that perspective. I think a lot of the attitude that I see from your work with health tech investors as well as your podcast is about sharing that learning, building trust, and building community first. I think monetization is a secondary aspect that I haven't figured out or don't aim to figure out just quite yet, largely because I recognize that there is value that needs to be added first before there's anything that can be asked of anyone overall. I think building community like you have through the pitch competition, etc., is certainly a really good way to do it. But the way that I'm going to flip this question back on you is that you started health tech investors and built it around the idea of an angel syndicate. So for those who are less familiar with what that term is, what is an angel syndicate? Why did you choose to build something like that? And kind of what are the next steps from that standpoint?
Yes, and put it bluntly, the goal of HealthTech Investors was for me to sell online courses to be medicine. And it has pivoted and changed quite a bit since I that was the initial goal.
Okay.
But I thought I could teach people how to invest in startups about what I know.
Hmm.
I'm a fairly new investor, about a year old, I think. I'm closing in on my fifth investment now for the past year. Um, but I think in some ways you learn the best from people who are like one step ahead of you, not 20 steps ahead of you, because they're looking at the world and investing in such a different framework with a different portfolio construction, different check size. It's hard for me to learn from Mark Andreessen, billion, you know, in the latest Adam Newman company. I don't have a framework I can apply there
Yeah.
right now. Well, I want to learn from someone who's investing 25, 100,000 and very early stage startup, first time founders.
Hmm.
Picking the because and then I'll answer your question, then I'll come back to this train of thought.
Sure.
Um, so the initial thought was, okay, I'll launch this course, I'll make this course, and I'll sell it. I thought, okay, the best way to sell this is to. I knew where to reach physicians was Facebook groups. And this is kind of just a marketing guide if people want. Physicians are not on LinkedIn, they're not on Twitter, they're on Facebook. Physicians who want to leave medicine are on LinkedIn and Twitter. But if you want to reach physicians who are practicing clinical medicine in the clinics, they're on locked Facebook groups. And you can get access to them. Our Facebook group, Physician Angel Investor. So I said, okay, I will just tell people I'm launching an angel. I just want to teach people how to angel invest. So I posted one post on one of these physician groups, and I had 280 physicians say, we want to join you. Uh, and that kind of grew to 500 something now, and I've kept it at that for now. So based on that, I asked them, okay, what do you guys want to do? I'm investing in startups, I'm investing in three, and I'm very honest in that group. This is how much I'm investing for a startup. This is my diligence. This is my deal flow thing. And they all said, we want to invest a small check size, 1 to 5,000 with you. That's how the idea of the pitch comp came to be. Once I had that, I'm like, okay, I need a website. So my wife, who I don't think you guys have met. So Lindsay is my wife. I don't know if you guys know
Didn't
that.
know.
So she kind of designed the website, and and then we've kind of been working on the website. And since then, I already had the podcast and I was posting on LinkedIn, and we kind of amalgamated everything under that. So now it's this educational angel syndicate platform. An angel syndicate is essentially angel investors, which are accredited investors, and that's based on your net worth or your salary. You can just Google, depending on the country you're in, Canada, the States. In Canada, I believe it's 200,000 per year in salary, like, outside of your primary residence for the past 2 years. In the States, I believe it's 250. So once you're accredited, you can start investing in startups. If you look at the markets as public equities, which is stocks, bonds, and all that sort of private equities, um, which is, private equity, traditionally private companies, very early on, these companies are called startups. And to invest in them, generally, you need to be an accredited investor. And it's partly because the Security and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, wants to protect people from being taken advantage of. There's a whole other discussion about crypto and people have been allowed to invest, lost money. And, having wealth doesn't give you just because you make money doesn't mean you know how to invest. But it does mean that you can probably lose some money without it affecting your long. So, it's an angel syndicate, essentially, accredited investors, you get together and there's different ways you can do it. You can either invest individually in companies or you can pool together, which is what I'm doing. And what pooling together allows us is to invest more so we get more rights when we invest in the company.
Hmm. Hmm.
Does
So
that answer the question,
you
John?
did, you did. Thank you. Uh,
I'm learning.
so I mean, you just finished off the pitch competition with the support of the Angel Syndicate. So reflecting back now, what were the motivations specifically behind the pitch competition? And did you succeed in your goals? And if you didn't succeed in some areas that you wanted to, where did you fail?
So first of all, thank you for you and Sanj and Rupin, because I couldn't have done without you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for stepping up and doing a lot of the grunt and scut work. Um, and also for offering your opinions and thoughts. I think you all have your strengths. You're all smart and intelligent and very capable. So I'm thankful for that. I think I would say it was overall a success. There's definitely things we could have been done better from my end in terms of organizational operations. And we still haven't closed on the investment because I'm going over the legals, the 350 pages I'm reading, legal documents that take some time. I did have a family emergency would set things back a little bit. But once this one is done, I'm hoping the next ones are more streamlined. And a little thing would be we would get all the startups applied before we start screening them. As you know, what happened in this one, we had 36 startups apply the last day, which is,
Bit of a last minute
so it
rush.
was, yeah, so we had to kind of go through the last few ones very fast.
Yeah.
And what that led to is it kind of, even though investors saw my thought process on all of them, it wasn't as educational as the first 30 or the first 40 startups.
Hmm.
So I think with focus on the educational component is important, teaching investors and teaching how we're doing the diligence. This as the market evolves, the things we value, the things we focus on will change as well.
Hmm. I think one of I guess I was digging through some of the changes you've recently made to highlight the ethos behind HTI. And you specifically state that there's a feature highlighted by four statements that you put up there. For this little part, I'm just going to do this fun thing where we go through each of them and like to pick your brain as to why you think each of these statements are predicted of the future and perhaps some examples that you can use to highlight your perspective on these statements. So one of the statements is a digital front door leading to a hybrid home care model for healthcare delivery. Why is that part of the future for you?
I took a course from it was an online course from Hopkins about primary care design in is that what I want to say? And the main takeaway is people don't want to travel for care. People want care at home. Sick, we want to be surrounded by loved ones and our comfort settings. So I'm a big believer at a digital front door or even a hospital at home model uh, because I think it's what people want and it's what's better for society. We'll reduce the rates of C. diff. It doesn't make sense to me to build these structures and congregate all the sick people there so they can spread diseases. Like it doesn't, right? The whole concept of hospitals is so archaic and it's just from, from a common sense perspective, it's great for us as physicians but it's not good for the patient.
Yeah.
So that's the primary reason I'm a big believer in digital front door. The other reason is um, the physician workforce shortage to an extent, or the clinician workforce shortage. I don't see that reversing. I think me and you know very well what are the reasons that we are burnt out. And none of those reasons are a focus. Even our own organizations have a focus on patient first. Um, our own unions are not focused on us. So, I think if you accept, okay, that shortage is only going to get worse, well, what is the alternative? The alternative is the patient taking care of themselves to an extent. That requires a shift in liability, a shift in reimbursement. But that's why I believe a digital front door where the small things the patients just take care of themselves to an extent, if they can. And this is based on a study by Deloitte, which a friend told me about. And I don't know if he wants to be named, so I'm not going to name him. Where, and this was also 10 years ago, they looked at patients and say, okay, what percent of patients actually want to take care of themselves? Because it's important to be screened who you offer the service to.
Hmm.
Because some patients don't. Some patients come to me and say, you're the doc, tell me what to do. I don't want to know anything. And that's within their right. If that's what they want, that's what they
Hmm.
But 12% of patients want to be their own doc. And then you have to say, okay, what percent of those patients want to be their own doctor because of ego? Or what percent of patients want to be their own doctor because they want the most evidence-based practice? And there is a subset of patients, as you and I know, that want that. They are happy doing their own strep swab. And if it's negative, not taking antibiotics. They're happy with that. So I think once you identify those patients, this service will have a big uptake. So I'm a big proponent of patients being their own doc. I recognize that means I don't have a job, but I'll be okay. And I think most physicians will be okay. And like innovation, there's jobs lost and jobs created. I think it's the pathway to innovation. And the goal should be for quality healthcare to be ubiquitous, meal level of care to be accessible in Senegal or Mogadishu or wherever.
Hmm. But
And
what does a
yeah,
digital front door specifically offer? Because I think that's to an extent a jargony term that can
yeah.
mean different things to different people.
Yeah, so I think your initial interaction when you're seeking care should be through a digital
Okay.
interface. It should not be a human. It's a very expensive, inefficient way where, whenever you have a cough is to call the doctor. There are some things we can triage. If you've had a cough for 2 days, I don't need to see you. Unless you have a high fever, unless you're short of breath, unless you're coughing blood. And there's maybe a couple of other things there, but it's not
Yeah.
some things in medicine are not, it's not an art, it's algorithmic.
Hmm.
I think this kind of goes back to see the world as it is, right? Don't when you're looking at these things, don't have preconceived notions,
Hmm.
but rather just kind of look at it as it is, first and foremost.
Yeah. The next statement that you use to highlight what you think of the future is solutions tackling clinician burnout while producing a tangible financial ROI for the payer. So, number one, what
Yeah.
does that mean in English? And number two, number two, why do you think that's part of the future?
So until we reach the fully autonomous but doctor patient model,
Yes.
we need to focus on clinician burden, or we will have this gap where, people just aren't getting care and they are suffering because that's happening right now. Like we've seen stories of late cancer diagnoses, especially in Ontario, because you know things are falling through the crack. Our cancer screening rates are still 60%, um, which to me is like unacceptable for a first world country. So I think talking to us and seeing why we're burnt out, reimbursement is a big component, liability or just dumping on a family physician, big component. Partly by specialists, but partly by hospitals. When I referred to, and I'll put sick kids on your front and center, they're world class, pediatric hospital, but their referral forms they're just too much. Like we don't have time to like go through the referral form. They should accept referrals from us. on a letterhead that just identifies all the information we have. Like we should have an account on their platforms. All these things like need to be identified and solutions need to be manufactured to address them because we need physicians, we need clinicians. I know put nurse practitioners and PAs because we all have the same issues with these administrative forms, administrative bloat and reimbursement, increased liability and all these things. Um, and then you have to look at why do people buy things? How do people value what you're selling? I'm a big proponent of value-based pricing, not time-based pricing. You're pricing something, but value for a business is money. Value for me and you bought that shirt because it makes you feel good and it looks good. But if you're a business, you're not going to buy something that makes you good because what makes you feel good is more revenues and decreased expenditure. So that's the financial ROI component. Is the health of a business is looked at as the health of in a B2C environment. It's different because people value different things at business.
Hmm.
But in a B2B environment, like you have to show increased revenue or decreased expenditure, and generally increased revenue is better
Hmm.
uh, and decreased expenditure.
Hmm.
You have to show it within 3 months.
So,
Uh,
what I'm interested in as well is why you have that two-part statement with regard to clinician burnout while producing a tangible financial ROI. Wouldn't solving the clinician burnout problem itself already provide tangible financial ROI for the payer?
so let's go deeper there. How would it provide a tangible financial ROI?
So, if the payer in a public health system is the public government itself, and if part of the reason why cancer screening rates are so garbage is because physicians are burnt out and they don't necessarily aren't keep track of all the forms necessary to keep all their patients screened for cancer all the time, then if you solve the problem of physicians being burnt out, then you get cancer screening rates higher, resulting in a better financial ROI by resulting or by needing fewer like tertiary level treatments for patients who do have cancer in the end,
Yeah. So and when is that financial ROI recognized approximately?
years down the line.
In you 3 months is when that financial ROI has to be recognized.
Fair.
Um, and this is kind of somewhat sadistic. And our financial statements are quarterly. Maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe for healthcare, we should be like, no, that's not the model we should follow. Maybe we should look at healthcare companies, when their annual statements or quarterly statements. Maybe we're not going to have any money statements 5 years. But then you're changing how business is done and, reporting requirements and accounting. That's a whole other discussion there. Uh, but you need to show it within 3 months.
Fair enough.
Is what I'll kind of say there.
Fair enough.
And solving clinician burnout does not show directly, doesn't show.
Yes.
So, this is why we invested in Soap is even though their platform can potentially reduce clinician burnout, it's adding revenue right there and then.
Hmm.
And then you get into incentives for the clinic versus the payer.
Hmm.
That in a provider model, incentives are somewhat aligned like Kaiser Permanente, but in the traditional and the usual model, they're not. And then value-based care again, and you have to get into value being measured by the process and not the outcome, because the outcomes incentivize perverse behaviors. And a great example is readmission rates, where if you say we want less readmission rates, okay, med people are less likely that I will not admit any sickle cell patient. And you're essentially punishing low SES for people, black people, brown people, immigrants, um, because they're the ones who have higher readmission rates of poor outcomes.
Yeah.
And the best way to control outcomes is to, make people white, make them male, and make them rich. You will only provide care to those people. And I think it's so important to recognize that because then you say, okay, I will incentivize you offering an appointment or a phone service or something to everyone who's discharged from the hospital. And that's the incentive. I'll measure the outcomes, but your reimbursement is tied directly to the process. Adam Grant talks about this. Good process, poor outcome should be incentivized. Poor process, good outcome should not be incentivized. That's luck. And that's external luck, not the luck where, preparation meets up.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll pause there, Jeff, because going on a time.
I've got two more of these statements to go through. We've got a little time left, but
Okay.
empowering communities for patients, which enable them to make their own decisions and shift accountability to the decision maker. So you kind of talked about this in point A, but if you could highlight who the decision maker is in this statement, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it would be the patient. It's kind of tied to the first point where, patients are making their own decisions based on TikTok, right? And based on other patients. They're saying, why not have them make decisions based on based
Mhm.
science?
But why are communities so important to the kind of patient decision maker complex?
I think that's just human nature. We divide ourselves into people who value community, don't. The vast majority do. And the vast majority if you look at tools of marketing, social proof is one of the strongest ones, reciprocity, emergency. You have the other ones. Um, but social proof is incredibly important. I think having that community, having other connected to others like you, maybe looking at the evidence together and reaching together with some guidance, I think is incredibly.
Hmm. Hmm. And I guess, are there any startups in particular that highlight this specific statement for you that come to mind?
There was one I met a year ago, Curatio, that was doing this.
Hmm.
I think Michael O'Brien, I'll shout out to him, worried, sickle cell patient. Uh, they're kind of working on this, and I'm sure I'm blanking on a few, but there's a couple I can mention.
Hmm. Fair enough. And the last statement you have is epigenetics will drive precision medicine. We've just started to uncover disease processes and target reversal instead of attenuation. Uh, Again, could you explain that in English? And then,
So, we focus on the end effects or the physical effects of diseases, not their true
yeah.
pathophysiology often. There's very few things we tend to reverse, uh, diabetes, high blood pressure. So for high blood pressure, we want to reduce high blood pressure, but we don't actually focus on the pathophysiology of high blood pressure. What are the changes happening in the wall? What is driving high blood pressure or clot formation and work? Let's try it. And I'm not going to get too technical. I think there's a gap here where we can focus more on the pathophysiology of diseases and have more targeted therapies to reverse disease. And epigenetics is a tool that could help here. So epigenetics is essentially how your genes respond to stimuli in the environment, use your phenotype. Uh, so a few ways to do it is one of the ways is DNA methylation, histones is another way. The other there, three ways the epigenetics kind of impacts your genes to produce different. And I think looking at population data there could give us access to identifying, okay, why is this disease happening? How can we reverse it? Now, the catch here is because when you think about it, the human genome is so vast. And if you look at all the permutations, you're going in the trillions at times. We have to use AI to look at these permutations. Inherent Biosciences is doing this company we're investing. And AI is a black box. So you have to be comfortable with we don't know why this is reversing the disease, but it is. We have good evidence. That ties into using AI for clinical trials, and that's a whole other space.
Hmm. To play the devil's advocate to that specific statement about targeting reversal instead of attenuation, though, doesn't that reverse the disease itself completely and result in, well, benefit for the patient, but at the end of the day, shrinking of the market overall, resulting in, essentially for businesses, a smaller market to target?
I think that goes back to
Yeah.
pricing. You price it more so it's still effective. The goal of healthcare is for it to not exist,
Yeah,
like in an
basically.
altruistic sense. Um, but so much of our outcomes are determined by societal factors, of what or our diet. That, how much do we actually affect the patient's health? I think it's an uncomfortable truth. We are not changing patients' health. It's, it's all these other factors that are having an outsized effect on them.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right. Thanks for making time to talk. Before we hop off, do you have any pluggables to plug? Anything that you're working on in particular that you like people to reach out to you for? or to listen to your podcast for?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to reach out to me, you can email hello@healthtechinvestors.com or find me on LinkedIn. Uh, and I don't want to say I get back to everyone because I don't. But if you send an email, I will do my best to get back to you. LinkedIn is a little bit too much these days. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Rashad. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.